Mexico has a diverse blend of cultural history dating back to the Mayans and the Aztecs. Through hundreds of years of war with both defeat and victory, Mexico has become strong in diversity. There are over 60 languages spoken. Spanish is the most prominent, and there are a wide variety of religions practiced. Although there is not an official religion in Mexico, the most practiced religion is Catholicism. About 80% of Mexicans identify as Catholic. The strong relationship with religion is also reflected in the structure of the family. It's not uncommon for families to have up to 3 generations cohabitating. Sometimes this is done out of tradition, but it's also sometimes due to economic necessity. The wealth in Mexico is not equal, and some people are very, very wealthy, and some people are very, very economically in despair. Gender roles in Mexico tend to be patriarchal. Men hold more power than women with regard to decision making. However, they'll often seek advice of their family. These personal relationships are considered to be very important in the Mexican culture, and this type of relationship is carried over into the business world. Personal relationships are of high importance, and it is essential that relationships are tended to and managed appropriately. Relationships are often built over many years, and there is a common understanding and respect that remains in an unspoken agreement when conducting business. In order to build on personal relationships, in-person meetings are often held. Human interaction, eye contact, and body language give a better overall understanding of one another. It is not uncommon for a personal question or subject matter to be discussed during a meeting. This helps to provide a better understanding of the core values of one another. My recommendations for business meetings with regard to culture in Mexico are to accommodate in-person meeting requests, though sometimes Mexican co-partners might be late. It is not uncommon for that to happen, and patience from the American side should be practiced. And also keep in mind that overall, the goal of the Mexican business is to improve their country. So noting how your business interaction will benefit not only the people that you're dealing with directly, but the country as a whole would also be very important.
Unlike the increasingly stark division of church and state in the United States, Mexico still incorporates the church and their traditional values into their judicial and government systems. These traditional values, derived from a predominantly Catholic heritage in Mexico, are also the basis of the business ethics that are practiced in Mexico. Mexican people value honesty, good faith, family, and respect for the hierarchy. Mexican men expect to be greeted with a handshake. However, Mexican women will not shake your hand unless you approach them first. When conducting business with Mexican people, it's important to respect their religion and remember their values. It's not uncommon for prayer to be said over business dinners. While Mexicans have many traditional values, it's important to remember that many of the countries in Latin America are still war-torn and unstable. While Mexico has made great progress in the last 50 years towards stability, it is still struggling with inefficient government and an inefficient judicial system. Mexico has a government similar to the United States in that it has an elected president, 2 congressional houses, and bipartisan politics. However, the Mexican government struggles with corruption and broken bureaucracy, making many business endeavors that would require government intervention very difficult. The Mexican judicial system is also overburdened and inefficient due to overpopulation, high crime rates, and low funding. Business law in Mexico seems to be relatively user-friendly to foreign investors and foreign companies looking to start an LLC. In Mexico, there's a permit process, and initial documents must be signed in the presence of a Mexican notary before they're filed. Foreign companies are also subject to government audit at any time. However, Mexico incorporates many privileges and benefits to its workforce that are government mandated. Among these are a mandatory Christmas bonus, paid maternity leave, employee profit sharing, a maximum work week of 48 hours, 9 legal paid holidays, extra reimbursement for religious holidays, and a federal minimum wage. These are all federally mandated requirements of employers in Mexico, which might make outsourcing labor to Mexico a less desirable option. Recommendations regarding business law, ethics, and politics in Mexico include showing respect for their religion, traditional values, and religious holidays. Don't be offended or refuse to participate in prayers over business dinners. Practice Catholic-based ethics when in Mexico or dealing with Mexican partners. Research the crime statistics and homeless population in any region you're looking to build a factory or warehouse. Ensure that you're prepared to meet all of the government mandates concerning employees before outsourcing labor to Mexico. And be aware that the political climate in Mexico is still very rocky. It has been improving, but it can still be very volatile at times, and there is corruption in the government.
Mexico's economy has been very rocky due to the corruption in the infrastructure and politics. There is also a lot of illegal drug trafficking that goes in and out of Mexico. Mexico relies heavily off of international trade. When it comes to investing in Mexico, investors need to take a careful approach because of the drug cartel and corruption in the government. The safest investment that I would recommend in Mexico would be agriculture. I personally would invest in agriculture because in Mexico, it's the biggest market, which means it's going to be the most protected market. So because Mexico relies so heavily off of their agriculture market, that will be the first and most protected market. The greatest strength of Mexico would be the geographic location. Just being right south of America gives them a huge advantage because of how often and how much products and produce and things that America needs that Mexico is able to produce. Mexico also has access to both the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean, so this allows them to run trade routes on both sides of the world. The last key advantage Mexico has is located on the equator. So being located on the equator, it allows for them to grow produce and fruits and vegetables that most other countries aren't able to, which allows them to be more valuable and which allows them to trade them for things that they need. For example, avocados. Mexico, one of the biggest single items that Mexico trades is avocados.
So our textbook, International Business, defines globalization as the trend toward greater economic, cultural, political, and technological interdependence among national institutions and economies. So this is a very broad definition of globalization, and there's an example of globalization that goes back hundreds of years and affects almost every country. You can narrow down globalization to the globalization of markets and production. So globalization of markets is the convergence in buyer preferences in markets around the world, and globalization of production refers to the dispersal of production activities to locations that help companies achieve cost effectiveness or quality maximization. So Mexico, in particular, has been highly impacted by different aspects of globalization. So the way that Mexico sits along the border of the United States has really impacted how Mexico has been affected by globalization. So states near the border have had high impact of globalization, whereas states that are in southern Mexico have had minimal globalization exposure. Globalization really took off in Mexico in 1885 when Mexico decided to drop their barriers to tariffs and eliminated restrictions on trade. And then about 100 years later, Mexico joined NAFTA And between 1980 and 2002, Mexico's gross domestic product increased from 11% to 32%. So there was a lot of benefits to the Mexico opening their borders to the rest of the world, but these changes increased income inequality across New Mexico. As you can imagine, areas near the U.S. border, which are more accessible for transport, they experienced higher incomes in comparison to southern states that didn't have the effects of globalization and weren't as important in processing materials and had higher shipping costs to export to the United States because they're farther away from the border. This also has affected the poverty rate. So in 1994, the poverty rate in Mexico was around 15%, and 18 years in 2012, the poverty rate was still about 52%. So there's been very little change between then and now, and part of this has to do with globalization because only some states and people in Mexico are benefiting from globalization. So Mexico in particular has been affected by globalization in that countries will outsource production to Mexico because the Mexican peso, for example, is 19.02 Mexican pesos to the American $1. So given this, people can hire people in Mexico to do low-skill labor and pay them a lot less than they would, say, in the United States. So a lot of the United States low-skill labor has been outsourced to Mexico, and this includes textiles, manufacturing, automobile parts, and this really has to do with low labor costs and a lower standing of living, which overall lowers the price of goods that are exported back to the U.S. to be sold. So, in conclusion, my recommendations, as Mexico continues to join the United States in the global market, it will continue to improve internally and as a trade partner, but we need to exercise patience when pursuing business endeavors in Mexico. And I think it's a good idea to partner with Mexico to produce textiles, auto parts, and other low-skilled labor because it is much more cost-efficient than producing them here in the United States. From a business standpoint, engaging with Mexico in international business will benefit the U.S., but from a socioeconomic standpoint, the unbalanced and low-skilled versus high-skilled employees in both countries increases income inequality, and hopefully in the future that income inequality gap narrows.
So the first trade relation I want to get into is the United States, being that it's the southern neighbor to us, or the northern neighbor to Mexico, and that they share such a enormous border, which is roughly 2,000 miles, includes a river, and that makes the connections through tourism, the environmental issues and health concerns are also the connections that are shared with the United States. A lot of the negotiations that happen between the North American Trade Agreement are usually confidential between the two countries, and Canada is also included in this trade agreement, but we don't have to talk about that because Mexico does not have a large section of their trade through Canada. In 1994 is when the North American Free Trade Agreement started, and it has almost been entirely insignificant between Mexico and Canada. The United States relies a lot on the Mexican manufacturers for help in their automotive, electronic, and machinery, as well as the appliances. Near the end of 2018, President Trump notified Mexico and Canada that he had intentions of withdrawing from the NAFTA, and this would have to go to Congress, and then they would assess both the economic and political ramifications that would happen through this. Another key trade relationships that Mexico has is with Australia, and this is another bilateral relationship, just like United States. They are part of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement Act for Trans-Pacific Partnership, also known as TPP-11. This provides Australia with the first free trade agreement with Mexico. The other foreign trade or foreign relationships forums that the Mexican government has is with the G20, which they hosted in 2012, that helped regain economic stability and expand international trade, financial regulation, and some food security. They are part of the Asia Pacific Economic Corporation, which involves 21 Pacific Rim countries that promotes free trade within the Pacific Rim and the Asia Pacific region of the world. This is a multilateral system between Mexico, Indonesia, and the Republic of Korea, Turkey, and Australia. Is known as the MIDICA. And the system draws diverse perspective on all the members in order to create shared interests, which helps the world on a global scale. They're also a part of the United Nations, which they joined in 1945 and have been a full participating member of that ever since, which helps maintain security and peace throughout the rest of the globe. And 46 other countries are involved in the United Nations. This gives Mexico a wide range of availability to export their goods through many different marketplaces, which also helps strengthen their government and their markets. A couple of weaknesses that have been going on in the Mexican government. They have a poor or little to no governance, and many Mexican corporations are seeking better conditions between foreign lenders and investors. The liquid secondary market has been prevented from growing because of this buy and hold investment strategy. And they've been the Mexican government has been unrestrained in international bond markets as well, according to bondsandloans.com. The weakness that's often overlooked by a lot of people thinking about Mexico is that since they're so reliant on the United States, is that if the United States economy is not doing well, then automatically the Mexican government does not do well either. 80% of their exports are to the United States, so they kind of rely on them a little bit too much. As far as the criminal side, they are 120 out of 163 countries in that, and that is a problem as far as like a business standpoint, because you don't want your business to go through a country that you might have problems with, and you might not be able to be completely reliable. So that's what hurts the economy, and that is some of the trade relations that I have discovered. All right, thank you.